start. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are watching us from. On behalf of the Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement and the Water Policy Center, it gives me the great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished speakers, chair, and participants who registered for the event. This is the fourth session of the day of the conference to chair and moderate this session. It's a real pleasure to have Ambassador Dr. Shambhu Simkhada here with us. Ambassador Dr. Shambhuram Simkhada is a member and a chair academic subcommittee Infrastructure Development Committee, National Defense University, Nepal. Ambassador Shambhuram Simkhada served as a member of Secretariat of the Special Committee chaired by the Prime Minister and its Technical Committee for the Supervision, Interrogation and Rehabilitation of the Moist Army Combatants. Government of Nepal between 2008 and 2013. He was permanent representative to the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and other international organizations in Geneva. Chairman of the United Nations Human Rights Commission, Ambassador to Switzerland, acting permanent representative to the United Nations, Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations, and Member Secretary and Treasurer of Social Welfare Council in 1989. He has recently published a book titled Human Rights, Human Wrongs in the Scale of Human Conscience. Without any further ado, let me now request Ambassador Dr. Shambhuram Simkhada to moderate the session.
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to welcome everyone who is joining this session to this very important conference, and of course, this particular session. We have a wonderful panel of speakers. Before I start with the panel of speakers, let me make a few, so to speak, the rules of the game clear. First of all, I'd like each speaker to speak for a maximum of 15 minutes. And if they exceed 15 minutes, then the host will mute their microphones. So please try and finish it within your time. Secondly, we hope that once we finish in time, that we have a very lively discussion. Now, obviously, I'm delighted that both Dr. Jaiswal and the Water Policy Center have invited me to chair this session. And of course, made me a part of this very important assembly of scholars, some practitioners, and someone like me who has seen both sides of the fence, so to speak. Both the scholarship and diplomacy side of international relations. This morning's session, the inaugural session, I think provided a wonderful backdrop to the nature of the discourse that we are going to have. In this context, I'd like to highlight two very brief points. One is when Nepal's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Honorable Pradeep Gyawali, talked about a series of contradictions that need to be resolved in the nature of interstate relations. And of course, the other speaker, whom I always have pleasure in listening to, and of course is very well known, former Indian Minister Jairam Ramesh, Dr. Jairam Ramesh, he highlighted a number of very pertinent issues when we're talking about the post-COVID-19 world, in his word, disorder, which I also agree in a sense that we are in a global paradigm flux. As it is, the post-World War II political order, the one paradigm has ended, but what is going to be the nature of the new paradigm? We don't know. And that is why I have called the post-World War II global political order as a paradigm flux. We are in a state of uncertainty. What is the nature of the new paradigm? Now that paradigm flux has completely been influenced by the uncertainty of the COVID-19 pandemic. So as a result, we are at a stage of history when we have to redefine and rethink many of the assumptions on which we have based our theories of international relations and our practices. We are at that stage of history. But one question I would have liked to pose in the first session, and of course, that is the question I will continue to pursue as I engage in this discourse. And I have raised in many of my work, both the book on human rights, human wrongs in the scale of human concerns. The other one before that, and more relevant to our topic, is known as Nepal, India, China relations in the 21st century. What is the nature of relationship among great powers, as well as between great power and smaller powers in the 21st century? Why do we call the present time the 21st century? So these are very significant questions. And that is where I think the question is, I can understand the policy of the United States when the president himself has defined as America first. So I can understand, I can explain that policy in terms of the approach of the leadership and the administration that is in power today in the US. But what I have difficulty in explaining is we have a leader in China who has come up with such a wonderful idea of a win-win relations among member states of the global community. And of course, he is well known for having said that he would like to create a community of shared destiny. And at the same time, we have a leader in India who has, as soon as he came up with this very laudable idea of neighborhood first. And subsequently the idea of sabka saath, sabka vikas, which in fact is precisely the kind of relationship that we need in the 21st century. And yet, why do we have the kind of relationship between India and China that we witness today? So as scholars, we need to take our inhibitions and timidity out. And if we want to define an international relation for the 21st century, for the post-COVID world order, which this morning we talked about a brave new world, how can a brave new world be guided by timid behavior? With that introduction, I would like to, perhaps if time allows, I will say a few things later on, if time allows. Otherwise, I would like to invite the speakers to make their presentations. And as I said, we have a very excellent panel of speakers this morning, or in fact this afternoon now. So the first is Dr. Netaji Abhinandan, Assistant Professor, Department of Political Science, School of Social Sciences, Ravenshaw University, India, and Director of Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies, India. He will talk about the evolving power relations in Indo-Pacific, options and opportunities for India. For Dr. Netaji, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Ambassador. Respected chair, distinguished co-panelists, scholars and friends from across the world. At the outset, let me express my sincere gratitude to my good friend and JNU mate, Pramod Jaiswal, for inviting me and making me part of this grand academic event. I really wonder how could he be able to organize such a grand event involving scholars, academics, experts from different regions, different countries, and perhaps this is the, in a way, best takeaway from this pandemic situation, that hundreds of scholars could gather on a single platform over a period of 3 days, exchanging ideas and opinions. Uh, in fact, esteemed ambassador has set the tone of this session by making some pertinent points in the beginning. So, as the titles suggest, that I would be talking about the restructuring of power relations in Indo-Pacific and what is there for India in this evolving scenario in Indo-Pacific. As we all know, the world is passing through a transition. While this journey through this transitional phase had started before the onset of the pandemic has made the transition troublesome, as it has affected our lives, relationships, and exchanges in multiple ways. And in that sense, the pandemic has emerged as the most egalitarian imperialist of 21st century that has truly breached the gap between the developed and the developing world in terms of claiming lives and livelihoods. So you see that there is a discernible shift in the power dynamics in the world, as the ambassador pointed out. Uh, a dramatic restructuring of power relations, along with the intensification of geostrategic tussle, call for serious attention and analysis. Now let us look at Indo-Pacific. Uh, I'm not going into that angle, that why Indo-Pacific, the origin of Indo-Pacific as a geostrategic construct and its importance, but the fact is that the geo-economic and geostrategic importance of Indo-Pacific cannot be overemphasized, as it is not only home to the biggest and fastest growing economies of the world, but also to the strongest militaries and naval capabilities. While economically, it is one of the most vital of the regions in terms of politico-military contestations, it is also the most volatile. With the involvement of big powers like the US, China, Japan, and of late India, it has emerged as the new power zone of global political system, holding the key to global security. And if you look at Indo-Pacific, on one hand, there is a relative decline in US influence, as under Trump it seeks kind of withdrawal from major conflict zones and also from the responsibility to provide security to its friends and allies in case of any aggression. And on the other hand, there is a China, the big elephant in the room, who is aggressively pursuing to expand its power across different regions of Asia, Africa, and Europe, establish a Sino-centric order in Asia, and emerge as the most dominant power, upstaging the United States. And this fact of the matter is that China's belligerence, acts of aggression against countries like India and Vietnam, its policies of expansionism and revisionism to the detriment of its neighbors, have led to a confrontational atmosphere where conflict, either between the US and China or India and China, looks very, very imminent. So the recent policies and incidents suggest that the peaceful rise dictum has been shunned by Xi Jinping regime to realize the Chinese dream, and that is nothing but the Chinese euphemism for hegemony. To achieve this, China of late has adopted coercive or offensive diplomacy against countries like India, Australia, United States, to some extent Japan, that is being dubbed as wolf warrior diplomacy. And India, you all know about Galwan, I'm not going into that angle. The point is that India is not the only country that is at the receiving end of China's aggression. In recent months, China has intensified its expansionist drive to claim territory. both land and maritime, against India, Vietnam, Philippines, Brunei, Taiwan, Malaysia, Japan, Indonesia, and also Bhutan. While the world is busy fighting the pandemic, China has moved towards consolidating its unverifiable claims in and around its neighborhood. And if you look at the South China Sea and East China Sea regions, China went for unprovoked action against countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, Japan, Indonesia, even during the peak of pandemic. Australia has also alleged cyber attacks by China. So there is a discernible pattern here in looking at China's targets, members of the quadrilateral. So China's policies and actions, especially during the Xi regime, have upended Asia's balance of power. And as we seem to be moving from an equilibrium to a situation of disequilibrium. And what is there for India? What are the options and opportunities for India? So the evolving geopolitical situation in Indo-Pacific presents both challenges and opportunities for India. That seeks greater economic engagement with ASEAN countries, especially in the maritime sphere, through mutually beneficial partnerships and collaborative projects. And if you see that there is a sense of disquiet and discomfort among the countries of the Southeast Asia with regard to China's growing assertions and China's expanding power and influence. And these Southeast Asian countries, along with the US, Japan, and Australia, they are looking towards India to play a proactive role in maintaining security status quo in Indo-Pacific. India, that had remained mostly flaccid to growing Chinese activities in Indian Ocean region, no longer wants to remain a passive player, and that is quite apparent. It now intends to become one of the principal actors in the region by aggressively pursuing its political, economic, and security interests vis-a-vis China. So, what are the concrete options that India must go for in formulating its strategy for the evolving power relations in Indo-Pacific? The first should be initiating a concrete maritime policy. India needs to initiate a strategic maritime policy in consultation with coastal states like the state to which I belong to, like Odisha, to protect its maritime resources and interest. India needs to augment the security capabilities in the Indian Ocean region. We must not forget that the perpetrators of 26/11 attack in 2008 in Mumbai came by sea. And here I propose a new strategic narrative, that is Act Indo-Pacific. Just like the Act East, we must go for an Act Indo-Pacific policy. You see that India of late has adopted a pragmatic strategy that entails active participation in the debate on South China Sea and revival of maritime linkages with countries like Myanmar, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Vietnam. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi's call for open, inclusive, democratic, and transparent Indo-Pacific region during Shangri-La Dialogue in 2018. And India's strenuous efforts to augment maritime connectivity with immediate and extended neighbors through initiatives like Sagarmala could be seen as part of this strategy. So Act East may very soon evolve into Act Indo-Pacific, signaling India's intent to play a major role in the region. And then the third option should be greater engagement with extended neighborhood. India's growing ties with Japan, the defense agreement with Vietnam, which includes the sale of advanced helicopters and spares for MiG fighters, and the move towards developing close military relationship with Singapore reflect a dynamic shift in India's approach towards the power politics in the region. The focus on maritime issues is evident from the increase in maritime exchanges led by Indian Navy with countries such as Vietnam, Singapore, Indonesia, and Japan. Then we must build maritime partnerships with key players. To counter China's increasing maritime assertiveness, India has entered into maritime partnerships with key players who can help in maintaining strategic balance in Indo-Pacific region. There are some details. In 2016, India and US signed a logistics exchange memorandum of understanding. India has signed a similar agreement with Singapore. India has signed agreement with Seychelles, and also India also has signed a strategic pact with France, opening up their naval bases to each other's warship across the Indian Ocean. And in fact, this is very important deal. Grants Indian Navy access to strategically important French ports, including the one in Djibouti. Then we must have greater strategic initiative. So India has been assiduously making efforts to institute small yet significant tactical initiatives both at the ideational sphere as well as the politico-economic strategic sphere. In March 2015, Prime Minister Modi put forward the concept of Sagar, security and growth for all in the region. It's a maritime initiative aimed at enhancing a range of capacities and fostering greater cooperation among the littoral countries. Now there have been 2+2 dialogues with US, Japan, and Australia, trilateral dialogue between India, Japan, US, and US, India, Japan, Australia. These kind of dialogues are also continuing, and we must also look towards strengthening the Quad more and more. So this deepening of understanding among India, US, Japan, and Australia in terms of information and intelligence exchanges, personal interactions, these things are evolving over a period of time. This Quad may expand to include important countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, and South Korea, as well as some other smaller countries. And also, but the most important point that I would like to make is that India needs to build a grand strategic narrative of its own to counter China's aggressive diplomacy, military and ideological wherewithal to be a stabilizing player in the region. So from New Delhi's perspective, consolidation of Sino-centric regional order in an Indian Ocean region would surely be detrimental, affecting its economic and strategic interest in the region. So, there can be a juxtaposition between India's Sagar and America's free and open Indo-Pacific, and this can become a grand strategic narrative defining the political security order in Indo-Pacific and ushering in new opportunities for all the stakeholders in Indo-Pacific. I'll just conclude with my remarks that under Narendra Modi, as the ambassador pointed out in the beginning, India is emerging as a crucial player in the strategic power play in the region. To solve necessary strategic imagination and adaptation for India to face in the 21st century. India cannot afford to remain non-committal on crucial strategic issues and challenges confronting Indian Ocean region and has to be very pragmatic and assertive. The reorientation of policies and approach towards security and diplomacy has started taking shape under Modi, but it is a very, very long journey and it is just only the beginning. Thank you so very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for that very, very thought-provoking idea, which in a way coincides with my own view of the centrality of India in the evolving post-COVID world order. If India is able to play the role that that many of us hope and view that it can. With that, I'd like to move on to the next speaker. and that is Shweta Basu, student Masters in International Relations, Pondicherry Central University, India. And she will talk about impact of COVID-19 on Indian economy, emerging trend of economic illiberalism. Again, welcome, Shweta, and all the best to you to conclude your time as very well created precedent by Professor Netaji on time. Thank you. Your floor is yours, please. Hello, is Shweta around? Shweta around? Can you hear me?
Sir, after Netaji, there is Dr. Angira Singh Sarma.
Okay, so let's move on to Dr. Angira Sen Sarma, Assistant Professor, Center for Development Studies, University of Allahabad, Prayagraj, India, a place which is very close to Nepal's academic world, because many of our former graduates are from Allahabad University. Dr. Sarma will speak on the topic COVID-19 and India's health diplomacy. Floor is yours, Dr. Sarma.
Am I audible?
Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chair. At the outset, COVID-19 and India. I agree that COVID-19 has changed the world scenario in a way that none of us had ever expected. And one thing that has came up very, very strongly, that health issues are no longer confined to domestic boundaries, and there is need for serious deliberation on transnational aspects of health. Has once again reinforced that how health issues can pose serious non-traditional security threats, and also that how health issues can have serious ramifications on governance, economic, politics, the impact of which can be beyond borders. Now, having said that, is not that. Having said that, is not to say that COVID-19 was the only health issue that has been affected across borders. We have seen SARS in 2003. We have seen how Ebola, Zika health issues are affected. But what COVID has done, it's such a massive scale, and at the same time affecting so many countries, both developing and developed. It has opened new vistas of deliberation on health issues and how health issues can have serious implication of security threats. Having said that, WHO had earlier said that pandemics, newly emerging communicable diseases, and threats of bioterrorism are clearly now understood as direct threats to national and global security. The strategic relevance of health has changed as health has become an integral part of economic, geopolitical, security, social justice, including human rights and domestic foreign policy, among other emerging agendas. So when we talk of diplomacy, what is diplomacy? Diplomacy is basically managing a country's international affairs. And if we take on Clausewitz's statement, it's an extension of politics. So when we come to health diplomacy, it's a diplomacy to manage major health challenges that affect the population. It can be prevention, it can be detection, or just responding to health issues. The three main goals of health diplomacy, as highlighted by WHO, are better health security, improved relation between states, and commitment for a wide range of actors, and achievement of outcomes that are deemed fair and support the goals of reducing poverty and increasing equity. Today, there is a recognition of health as a goal of foreign policy and a key contributor to development, peace, poverty reduction, social justice, and human rights. Having said that, when we talk of health issues, development, poverty reduction, one cannot ignore ignored UN 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development, where we have SDG 3 earmarked specifically for health sector, and we see how health issues have been a cross-cutting theme for many other SDG goals. Now, coming back to a little bit of historical background, how global health issues has evolved, it's not that COVID-19 is a unique case of health diplomacy. I mean, health diplomacy has been in for a long time. Classic example is the yellow fever, how countries have cooperated to eradicate or vaccination for yellow fever. Going back in the 17th century, 18th century, the first international sanitary conference was held in 1851, which was basically to discuss plague, yellow fever, and cholera, which led to the establishment of international health regulations in 1969. And then subsequently, we have a Pan-American Sanitary Organization in 1902, then Health Organization of the League of Nations in 23, and finally, we had WHO in 1948. Today, an interesting aspect is that global health diplomacy is not confined to state actors. It has a number of non-state actors also involved. So, health diplomacy has evolved over the time. Now, coming back to the implications of COVID on the global economy, which states the scale of the loss that COVID-19 has inflicted upon us. Global economic institutions has predicted that the loss for the pandemic can be approximately between 6.5 to 9.7 of the global GDP. And IMF has predicted that 3% contraction of world economy in 1920. What does it call for? It calls for a greater multilateral cooperation to fight this pandemic, which has been very aptly pointed out in the inaugural session also. That there's no denying the fact today we need greater regional cooperation, greater international cooperation to look at health issues not only from the prism of health but also as a wider prism of security, economy, so that there is a more holistic approach to handle health issues. Now, coming to India's growing health diplomacy, it's not to suggest that COVID is the only time that India has embarked on health diplomacy. We had health diplomacy much longer time. It's only that COVID-19 has made India more proactive and substantive part of its health diplomacy. If we go back into since 2009, we have a very strong connection African countries with whom we have a telemedicine through the PAN-E network or Pan-Africa E-network. We also have we've been supplying medicines to African countries. Now, coming back to the COVID situation, in March 2020, when WHO declared COVID as a pandemic, India immediately called for video conferencing with the SAARC countries. So we can say virtual diplomacy is in with all this video conferencing that is taking place since the pandemic has come up. This video conference with SAARC has again reinforced the need for regional cooperation to handle issues like this. India had proposed $10 million US dollar fund for emergency fund to fight COVID, and if I'm not mistaken, the total fund now is around $26.1 million. And it was very clearly stated in the video conference that we need a more cooperative mechanism to handle the pandemic. And it was well supported by all the SAARC countries. And that's a very important part. We are all aware how the bilateral differences has stalled many of the SAARC summits. So there's an opportunity for regional organizations like SAARC to come together and address concerns which are affecting all of us in the region. Then I will not go into the details of what India is doing. That is well available but just to highlight that some major steps that India has taken in this time since the outbreak of the pandemic. India has been sending medical medicines to the countries, and also it has sent rapid response teams to countries like Kuwait, Maldives, and there is training programs going through e-ITEC programs from healthcare professionals and paramedics from SAARC countries and also to other countries. Um, Also, as part of India's medical diplomacy, India has sent the Indian naval ship Kesari to Maldives, Mauritius, Madagascar, which is also part of our Sagar mission, which my former speaker has highlighted. Uh, this is just a background of what India is doing. But when we talk of health diplomacy, we are sure that health diplomacy is an important aspect, evolving as an important aspect of our foreign policy approach. But we cannot ignore the geopolitical dimensions of health diplomacy. And when we talk of geopolitical dimension, keeping in mind this pandemic situation, China factor definitely comes as a major factor. In the morning also we have seen in our inaugural session where the speakers have pointed out there's a trust deficit. We need to build on that. We need confidence building measure so that this difference, the geopolitical ramifications, the geopolitical complexities are lessened. So when it's not that only India is engaged in health diplomacy, China is also doing, but then China's health diplomacy is seen as a part of this broader BRI project or the Health Silk Route Initiative. So it is imperative that we take health diplomacy more as a cooperative mechanism rather than on a geopolitical rivalry, which will not take further the cause of cooperation. Again, coming back to the institutional mechanism that is available at the international level at the time, we need to see how we can cooperate with the institution rather than sidelining the institution. With the outbreak of the pandemic, we have seen how WHO has questions about that. The WHO credibility has come in dealing with China. Then US withdrawing its fund from WHO. This can be counterproductive. We know there are US-China issues, India-China issues, but this differences will not lead anywhere in sense of handling this pandemic situation. India is one of the 10 nations to join the executive board of the WHO and is currently the chair of the executive board. So a lot of responsibility in India to handle this crisis and also to see that the institutional mechanism available at the present can be used for greater cooperation at multilateral level.
Voice. Audio? Problem with the audio? I'm not getting any sound.
Ma'am had low connectivity. She has joined again.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Please go
ma'am,
ahead.
you're audible.
Okay. Okay, I don't know, how much of my presentation you could hear. I'll just start from where I sense that the internet got disconnected. So, today when we have, I have spoken about, the pandemic, the outbreak of pandemic, how India is going ahead with this health diplomacy, and how global health diplomacy has come back into the forefront of international politics. And there's a growing consensus that we need to discuss more on health security issues. So when I say that health diplomacy is part of our foreign policy,
I think Dr. Sharma is having problem with her audio. I think you should go towards concluding because your time is almost up.
Okay. I will just conclude with the thing that Switzerland had a health policy linked with the foreign policy back in 2006, and they also have a center for global health center, which are things which we can also look into when we are at the multilateral level, when developing and developed countries are talking about it. So in conclusion, I would like to say that when health diplomacy now is developing as an integral part of our foreign policy, and if I quote Professor Harshman, that it is a part of India's larger foreign policy matrix to project India as a responsible global stakeholder. And when I say that, that doesn't mean that everything is well within the country also. I mean, COVID-19 has very clearly shown that how miserable healthcare sectors are in various countries, not only developing, but developed countries also. We definitely need to increase our GDP share in health sector, which will also give India a better say in international platforms. And as an important stakeholder and as a country, we can have more regular bilateral and multilateral cooperation, and also we can use further platforms to join for joint research programs between various countries, which will give health issues a more stronger voice in further international diplomacy. Thank you. I look forward for questions and comments.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma. It's an excellent presentation. Especially you brought out two very important elements. One is, of course, all of us in South Asia, we are very delighted by the initiative of Prime Minister Modi that as soon as this pandemic hit, that he came up with the idea of of India's, as the most preeminent power in the region, to work together, and of course contributed a large fund for South Asian countries to work together. That was a very important initiative, very good initiative. But given the state of relations between our countries, how far that has gone is an issue. But nonetheless, it was a wonderful initiative, a great expression of leadership. Second point that came out from your ears, I remember when I was ambassador in Geneva. In fact, India used to every year organize a traditional medicine fair to demonstrate its old history of traditional and more affordable medical practices. Today, we know that India is greatly suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic. In fact, it's gradually becoming, and there are predictions that in fact, India could be the biggest epicenter of this pandemic. And as a close neighbor, and of course with open border with India, we, more than any other country, we experience the pain that you are going through. So of course we wish India all success internally in controlling this terrible pandemic, so that the health diplomacy that India conducts outside also becomes effective, because diplomacy is essentially an expression of your own internal situation. So with this, I would now like to move on to our next speaker. Professor Lobsang Dorje is a lecturer at the Sirbatse College, Royal University of Bhutan, and he will talk about China, India, Bhutan trilateral relations. Professor Lobsang, you have the floor. Hello, are you there? Professor Lobsang Dorje, are you there? Host, can you track him, please? Hi. Unmute yourself and go ahead, Professor.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Please go
Good
ahead.
morning
Welcome. Welcome.
to all the. Okay, today I'm going to talk about Sino-Bhutan India ties in South Asian spectrum. But the study does not represent the government views or institution. Rather, it is purely my view. And the title of my paper is China, India, Bhutan Trilateral Relationships. As we are aware, in South Asia, the change in power dynamics offers new insight to look at Sino, India, and Bhutan in the context of trilateral relationships. At present, the dawn of the 21st century, we are aware of it, China and India are two most powerful actors in the region, increasing the developmental cooperation partnership in international global politics. As a result, the South Asian decision-making process are often seen vulnerable in implementing foreign policies when dealing with neighboring giants like China and India. Bhutan is no exception. She has always faced the difficult task of maintaining its ties with its two big neighbors. Therefore, the study was carried out using an interdisciplinary uh, approach on the synchronization theory of international relations. Moreover, this paper also draws a comparison of the bilateral events, frequencies, or occurrences, which is variables of the study of all the bilateral events formed by three countries in a triangular relations by facing historical events based on analysis of event synchronization such as reliability, validity, replicability, and generalization. So, to demonstrate the logical continuity of previous and present work, my study consists of the background information, the statement of the problem, the significance and objective of the research to underpin or to understand the research gap of my study. So while going through some of the research articles, journals, books written by various scholars throughout the world, the gap that I discovered in interpreting and in analyzing the subject of my study, it is all about historical interpretation. It's all about the pursuit of the foreign policies. For instance, Indian foreign policy in the Indo-Pacific region, China's foreign policy of Belt and Road Initiative, China's influence in East Asia, India's dominant role in South Asia. So therefore, the rise of giant would mean checking the BOP or balance of power with hard power or soft power influences in South Asia, and it goes beyond, it transcends. And then there are some obstacle with historical animosity to build trilateral ties with those lingering issues of historical hatred will continue to moderate the pace. And the ties or relations of Bhutan with China cannot be analyzed without considering or without understanding India as an important variables in the relationship. In reality, interaction between Sino, India, and Bhutan are as complex as bilateral. So now to discuss the trilateral event, applying the theory of synchronization event of international relation. So the first of all, we need to look at the landlocked Himalayan countries, how it has become increasingly important to both New Delhi and Beijing, and the reality of viewing it as a paradox in Sino-Bhutan ties in that region. So in order to understand the trend and the trilateral ties, historical significance are used to evaluate what was significant about the selected event and development in the. So now, if we look at the historical epoch or any historical event, so Tibet and Bhutan share a long tradition of culture and religious interaction with a common border to China. So now, at present, however, at present, China and Bhutan have not established any diplomatic ties in Beijing and Thimphu. At present, the common border remains closed without any economic contact with one another. And Bhutan and Tibet relationship is an important scholarship to understand Sino-Bhutan ties. in the region. The outcome of Tibet and Bhutan engagement resulted in the evolution of Bhutan's social and political institution during medieval period. And another approach of historical event to analyze Sino-Bhutan, Sino-Bhutan and Indian bilateral relationship is on the basis of the event of Kuch Bihar of 1772. An involvement of British East India Company labeled Bhutan as a threat and a political channel to Tibet, which would mean it's a buffer zone, and during 1772. And the Young Husband mission of 1904 between British East India Company and Tibet, there was a Soviet threat of communism to Tibet, and the mission was led by Ugyen Wangchuck to be an able negotiator in the Young Husband mission of 1904 between British East India Company and the Tibet. And even the establishment of Wangchuck dynasty in 1907, it marked the signing of Treaty Punaha Treaty in 1907 with British East India Company. Further, the emergence of People's Republic of China and India in 40s have compelled Bhutan to choose the policy of isolation. And subsequently, Indo-Bhutan Treaty of 1949, India had sown the seed of ties with Bhutan by renewing the Treaty of Bhutan of 1910, which was signed during the colonial rule of British East India Company. But we need to remember the subject of Chinese annexation of Tibet. Chinese annexation of Tibet in the mid-1950s generated cultural shocks and fear to sovereign Bhutan, which would mean it is political insecurity. During political insecurity, the visit of Nehru in 50s, which would mean it was reassurance to safeguard the independence of Himalayan landlocked country Bhutan. Meanwhile, the tension escalated between China and India on subject to Tibet, and China and India reached at a stage to wage war against each other. Consequently, the Bhutan drive to fast air plan started in 1961, and India with Bhutan by being strategic partner, strategic partner, but not strategic location by financing 5-year plan budget, and simultaneously when the proxy war between Sino-India were going on. So even the Sino-India war is also important historical event to understand the trilateral ties. The Sino-India War of 1962 created tension to sovereign Bhutan as its territory was adjacent to the battlefield, we know that. And subsequently, to maintain our status quo, Bhutan adopted the policy of neutrality in the region. And it has shown pragmatic and effective diplomacy. And it is evident from Bhutan joining into several international organizations, including United Nations, with the Indian support. And in regard to Sino-Bhutan border issues, the progress has been slow on Sino-Bhutan border issues since 1984 to present days. The only hope for Thimphu was to maintain our status quo and to await improvement in Indo-Chinese relation. Nevertheless, Bhutan had to still adjust the treaty commitment to India on Sino-Indian relation, as Indian factor remained a key element, a key variable in Bhutan's China policy. Indo-Bhutan Treaty of 2007. Although Indo-Bhutan Treaty of 2007 gives freedom to implement her foreign policy without advices and guidance from India, Bhutan have not looked for any scope to maintain bilateral ties with China at the cost of undermining historical ties between Bhutan, India. And Bhutan continued to maintain warm and cordial ties with India due to awareness of the role of India in diplomacy, defense, and economy. However, the 21st century economy roadmap for Bhutan, the concept was articulated by Majesty to the nation on China and India experiencing unprecedented economic growth propelled by technological advances. So Bhutan cannot afford to avoid what we don't yet understand and hope for the best. Such an attitude will do us to national objective of self-reliance. So accordingly, the concept of 21st century economic roadmap became national initiative to chart out Bhutan's long-term economic direction, short-term, medium-term plans, programs, and policies with the central goal of maximizing gross national happiness. Now, to sum up my study, there is a geopolitical alignment in the region. And China and India, the paradoxical nature of ties will twist Sino-Bhutan relationship in South Asian spectrum. China and India will try to enhance their presence in Bhutan due to her strategic location. As a result, there will be a military strength of China and India will create a new tension, escalate new tension in Bhutan and the disputed border territory because of instability that is produced as a threat. Sino-Bhutan border territorial dispute and Sino-Indian border territorial disputes are not related to status quo, but are politically related. Technically, they are not related, but politically, they are related. Bhutan will face new challenges with China and India's diplomatic threats while maintaining their presence in the region. Now, Bhutan, as a small country, will have to keep a low profile as we are doing it today in the international arena and must avoid taking part in South Asian political game. And China, India, and Bhutan may also need to consider trilateral cooperation in the area of non-traditional security. Sino-India, Bhutan need to begin effective trilateral with a mutual effort to support each other's country's core strategic vision and can lead to normalization of process in the region. Three countries can pursue trilateral relationships, but the worry is on pragmatism among the leaders in this region raises a question of doable. The only hope for Bhutan is to wait the improvement in China and Indian relation in the region by pursuing the policy of balancing act. Thank you. Thank you. This is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Professor Mobzang Dorje. Your presentation reminds me of my book. Let's see. My book, I wonder if you have, I don't know what happened, something wrong with my video. This is called Nepal, India, China Relations in the 21st Century. And in it, there is a piece called Post-Doklam Reflections. When China and India were standing eyeball to eyeball in Doklam, soon after that, in November, I wrote this piece called Post-Doklam Reflections. And the main thrust of that piece was to ask China and India, what is the nature of relationships they want to pursue with each other? But more importantly, what is the expectation of smaller neighbors like Bhutan and Nepal in terms of the great power relationships? And China and India obviously are two great powers and have historically been great civilizations. And now again, after a certain period of decline, are now reclaiming their rightful places at the global high table. And what is the nature of that relationship will greatly affect countries like Bhutan and Nepal. That is the thrust of the article. Thank God, in April of the following year, there was Wuhan summit. And of course, the Doklam problem led to a sort of good modus vivendi. My most recent article on which way are India-China relations heading talks about from Doklam to Galwan. So that sort of is reflective of the nature of smaller neighbors, which are surrounded on one side by China, on the other side by India. So with that, I really appreciate your presentation. And so, shall we move to the next speaker? What is the status about her? Is Sweta Basu available? Organizers, hosts?
Yes, sir.
Is Sweta Basu available?
No, sir.
I see. Okay, so this is the end of the presentations,
Sir,
right?
there is one more, Professor Anubhuti Yadav.
Doesn't show it in the program that you sent me, but please go. ask her to go ahead.
Yeah.
But it has to be very much on time, because we are. So please, Professor
So,
Yadav, you can go ahead.
Yeah,
yeah,
thank you
we
very
have
much.
time till
Yeah,
1:45.
yeah, thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, please go
Yeah,
ahead.
thank you very much. And, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be part of this esteemed panel, and also in a panel where, the chair is very strict with the timing. That's a very good thing. My brief was, I have to make a presentation on impact of COVID-19 on media and entertainment sector in India. So before that, just wanted to share with you that, this is a very difficult time for all of us, and all of us are, we are improvising ourselves. We are finding different ways of, doing things. And especially like, when it comes to conferences and, the seminars, as academicians, we were having this feeling that maybe like this year, we won't be able to interact with the scholars from the different parts of the world. But I think the technology has made this possible, and that's a very beautiful thing. But this COVID-19 has actually impacted, almost all the sectors, and I'll be focusing on, as I said, media and entertainment sector. So first of all, thanks for putting it together. So when we talk about the media and entertainment sector in India, it's a 1,691 billion market. It's a huge market, and we have seen in the past, how the COVID-19 has affected this market. So what I'm going to do is I'll take you through, all the segments of media and entertainment industry and how it was being impacted, and then maybe like, the major impact on all the sectors in a holistic way, and then what is the way forward. So if we talk about the print media, which includes newspapers and magazines, which is 333 billion industry, we faced, and this is something which had been faced, across the world. We faced this problem that the people started, discontinued the subscription of newspapers and all because of the fear of infection. So that is something which happened not only in India, but, in the different parts of the world also. And at that point of time, most of the newspapers, they came with their PDF versions, and which all of us might have, read, and all of them, they were the free versions for all of us to see and read. But the biggest problem which was faced by the print sector was that, there was no monetization of, those, initiatives which they had taken, which means that the free, products were available, but they were not able to make money out of it. So like there was a revenue loss, when we talk about the print sector in India and across the world. But, one very important thing which had happened and that revived the print media, and especially the newspapers, after that temporary phase, was that it was considered as a credible source of information. The moment, the pandemic came, there was, bombardment of a lot of information, misinformation, disinformation, fake news related to COVID-19. And at that time, the people realized that they need to go back to the newspaper, because that's the more credible source of information to get update on this particular issue and the pandemic. So this is about the print, how it was affected. When we come to television, it is around 714 billion market. And if we talk about the television, initially the viewership increased like anything because of the lockdown. Everybody wanted to do something at home, so television was there. But it reduced because of the lack of fresh content, because people were not able to create new content, for serials, for entertainment programs. So that's a problem which was faced. But the news channels, they saw a surge in the viewership, because people were hooked on to news channels because they wanted to know about COVID-19 and all the information related to that. But in this case also, monetization dropped. What happened that most of the advertisers, they pulled up their advertisements because they didn't want to advertise their product at this time of crisis, because they say that it doesn't look nice that the crisis is going on, people are affected by that, and we are going on screen, television screen, selling our products. So the monetization dropped, and that's how the television sector was impacted. Coming on to films, there were low footfalls. Definitely, people have to move out, so they were not going because of the lockdown. As far as the recovery from this is concerned, as far as the film sector is concerned, it will be based on maybe like the location of that particular place, how affected those particular areas were because of pandemic, and what kind of experiences people had at that point of time. So the film sector, I mean, still, they actually experimented with the new ways. Say, for example, we had seen in the past there are new films were released not in the theaters but on OTT platforms. So they, in a way, were able to handle that. The silver lining amongst all this was OTT platform. There was rise in OTT consumption. People were, they started shifting from, print television to OTT platforms. There were a lot of people who came onto these platforms for the first time. So even in these platforms, for a one particular time phase, there was a lot of content, but suddenly, like, even these people realized that the content was drying up and they need to have fresh content. But the positive of OTT platform was because a lot of new people were coming up and they had a huge library, they had a huge repository of content, and which kept people busy with that entertainment content. Ad spend definitely was slow in OTT category. Also, people were not advertising. One very important thing which was done at this point of time is that all these OTT platforms, they give extension of the free time. For example, the people who are enrolling into it, were subscribing that, they were giving free subscription for that for some time. So this period was extended because they wanted this to become a habit and they wanted to derive subscription from this habit formation. So this is the strategy they adopted at the time of the pandemic. So OTT was the silver lining. Now radio. So radio did well because most of the people were working from home. There was no need to go out. There was local and topical content which was available. And but the problem was that there was a drop in the transit audience, which means people were not moving, they're not going to office, so there was no audience for that. And for the social media, there was 41%, there was increase in 41% usage, which is a huge number. The people were hooked onto social media platform to get news related to COVID-19 and anything related to that. But the biggest problem which was faced not only in India but in all parts of the world was that there was a lot of misinformation, disinformation, fake news related to COVID-19 on a social media. And that was the problem which we faced in our country, and there were a lot of initiatives which were taken for that. For example, if we talk about Government of India, Press Information Bureau, they have their own Twitter handle for busting fake news related to COVID-19, but that has to be related to government policies and programs. And we have seen that WHO also, like on their website, they have a section which is called Mythbuster, wherein any misinformation related to COVID-19 is available there, and they have debunked that for a larger audience to see. So there was a huge problem, but at the same time, social media also helped a lot of people, in the sense that there are a lot of awareness programs related to social distancing and how they can maintain hygiene. So majorly, what are the impact in a holistic way on media and entertainment sector? The ad spend pressures are there. People have, advertisers have pulled off their advertisements in all the segments, whether it's television, newspapers, radio, everywhere. And this pressure will continue for some time. Another very important thing is that, for the people who come from the low economic class, it will be very difficult for them to come back to the normalcy, and their consumption of media content will decrease like anything. We have seen a lot of reports from India wherein the migrants worker, they were sent to their places. So for them it will be very difficult, and especially like it will have huge impact on media and entertainment industry, because that's a large group of people who consume media content. Then digital consumer will see incremental growth, which means whether people will continue reading newspapers, they'll watch television, but we'll see the surge in digital consumers, people who would like to consume content on the digital platforms. At home entertainment will also see upswing. People will stop moving out in theaters to watch, films and all. So like there will be a lot of stuff which is available on their OTT platforms, and they'll be consuming that. And the outdoor entertainment will be the most affected, when we talk about, the COVID-19, and these are going to be a long-term, repercussions on media and entertainment industry. What is the way forward? The way forward is that we need to work on the digitization of content. That is something which is very, very important. We need to work on various digital models. For example, newspapers, when people stopped subscribing newspapers because of the fear of infection, they thought that okay, we'll circulate these PDFs, which is free of cost, but it definitely had an impact on them. So we need to have strong digital models. So if you are going on a digital platform, so how you can monetize that, because that's the most important thing for any media sector. They need to get that subscription money. That's how they're going to survive. And that's why maybe like during this phase there are a lot of people from the media and entertainment sector across the world, they have lost jobs. Second very important thing is digital penetration, which means that this will increase. We have seen in India in the last 4 or 5 months, people have moved on to digital platforms, whether it's in education, and if we talk about the education, the entire thing is happening online. So we'll see a lot of increase in digital penetration. That will also mean a lot of digital content for people. Then when we are talking about digital media consumption, we are also talking about the way they are consuming it, and we need to have more nuanced profile of these users. So the way it was working with television or maybe like print media, it won't work with the digital platform. With the digital platform, we need to know like how people are consuming content on digital platform, and we need to profile those particular audience, and that is the huge task in front of media and entertainment industry. And then the last which is very, very important is the data protection. Because a lot of people are spending time on different platforms, those who are into education, those who are into teaching, they're on the platforms like Zoom, different other platforms. So how to protect data, that is the most important thing, and that is something which we need to focus on. So this is majorly about media and entertainment industry, how it was affected, and what is the way forward and what we need to concentrate in the time to come. One thing which had happened across the world and which had actually united all the countries is the initiative which was taken in this last 4 months on media and information literacy, because everyone knew that there's a problem of misinformation, disinformation. People are consuming content which is not right, which is fake, and it has created problem in number of countries. So number of countries joined hand together, and they came up with the initiative on media and information literacy, which means that the people, when they are consuming content, they should be they should consume in a responsible way, and they should be in a position to analyze the content which they are watching on television, or they are reading on social media. So for this, WHO has also started a series on media and information literacy. UNESCO has also worked on that. In India, the platforms like Google, Facebook, Twitter, they've also joined hands. Government is also working towards it. So this is the most important thing which had happened, and this is the biggest takeaway from this experience which we had in the last 4 months, that we have started talking about something which is very, very important and which had been neglected for so many years, that is media and information literacy. And I'm sure that in the time to come, we'll be having a lot of projects. I'm working on a number of projects on media and information literacy, and it's a very good thing that all the scholars and academicians who had conducted research in this particular area, now because of the technology, they are coming together and they are launching number of projects, so that the citizens are media and information literate, and which is very important for any democratic society. So I just wanted to be in time. I think the chair would agree to this, that so this is the last of part of my presentation, and I'll be happy to take any questions related to my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anubhuti. That was fascinating because this is probably a new dimension to the debate that we are engaged in. And of course, you brought out a few very, very significant elements. I do not see any questions in the chat room. So as a result, I'm a very strict in terms of timing, because I'm used to other areas where people are very, very controversial. You give 1 minute more to one speaker, and then you are in real trouble. But now I find this a very fascinating sort of combination of speakers. And as a result, since there are no questions there, I will myself raise a couple of issues on which I would like all speakers to come around. Of course, we gave backgrounds of all the other speakers, but Anubhuti, I would have liked to know a little bit about your own background, especially in the media and information. But one of the things that that came out from the last presentation, but of course also will be a key dimension of my own work in terms of the so-called post-COVID-19 world order. And of course, if you look at my topic tomorrow, where I will be speaking, is I have said, rush back to the old or search for a new. There is a people are talking about a new world order. But this is the same thing that has been going on since God knows for how long. In the UN, there was this idea in the 80s called the New International Order, NEO. But nothing new came out of it. Later on, it became almost a cliche that when I was involved in the international politics, to talk about end of the Cold War. Virtually every speech in the UN would invariably start with that cliche. Then, of course, came towards the end of the 20th century. Then, of course, the idea of a 21st century, with the start of the 21st century. So in one very important UN forum, I stood up and said, do we really know what do we mean by 21st century? Otherwise, if it's just a timeline, it's nothing but like yesterday, today, and tomorrow, or 20th, 21st, 22nd. If it does not bring you to realize the behavioral change that is essential to go with the dynamics of time and technology, then those the rhetorics have no meaning. And so when you talked about the entry into a more digitalized platforms, especially with the nature of society that we have in South Asia, that's a fascinating dimension. The data protection idea is how, the use of the media itself is becoming a reflection of how human behavior. I was born and raised in the hills of Nepal, where for almost 3-4 months, I would be cut off from my mother. There would be no means of communication. There were no transport, no communication, no. So 3 months when I was studying in Kathmandu, I was out of touch with my family. And yet today, you have this instant viewing and instant listening instruments. But these are only physical instruments of communication. And so when I stood up and looked at some of the big events of the so-called Millennium Summits and all that, if you look at people, there is really no real change in the will to communicate rather than the means to communicate. So how is that entry into the digital platform changing the real need to communicate? And that is being reflected in the interstate relations among nation states. That here we are at the 21st century, and yet we are behaving in the same way on the same theories, on the same state policies that were followed 200 years ago. So one of the issues that I would like to talk about, very briefly, 2-3 minutes each of the speakers, is there a real will to change? Do people realize that COVID-19, as far as I'm concerned, is a warning of Mother Nature for human behavior to change? So the option is either we decide to change, either in terms of the way we consume, either in terms of the way we behave with each other, in the way we treat the different dimensions of nature's creation. Now, climate change, it's all a result of our own actions. And unless we are prepared to change those actions, all these debates don't mean anything. So are we, is there a, and of course, if you listen to scholars and policymakers, they are saying that there is no evidence that there will be a change. That in fact, it will be business as usual as soon as the COVID-19 pandemic subsides. So I would like a little bit of a reflection from your own perspectives from all four of you in very short time before we conclude, please. Any volunteer?
Well, okay, I'll take this thing. Yes, there is a willingness to change, and we have seen changes happening, especially in the field of education. I mean, I'll talk about education because I come from education background. Now, there's this tectonic shift which is happening in the field of education, both school education as well as higher education. What educational technologists had been forecasting for so many years, that people will move to online education, and they've been doing it for so many years. This is something which is happening right now. For example, if we look at teachers, right, I mean, they might not have that digital literacy, or they might not be very comfortable with all the digital tools which are there right now, which is necessary for them to handle, to teach their students. But I've seen this thing in the last 3 or 4 months, how teachers are like, one, experimenting with these tools, learning it, and they are actually gaining that proficiency in handling those particular tools. Now, this is the best thing which has happened in these 4 months, wherein, especially like teachers, those who have gone onto the digital platform, and how, excellently, like, they are using these particular things. Something which, people have been saying that we should move towards blended education, hybrid model, or like online education, but we were not doing that. Just because we were comfortable with something which we had with us, maybe like face-to-face classes and everything. But right now, because of pandemic, I mean, this is the change which I think I have seen in the field of education, and which is good. Maybe like in time to come, we'll get back to face-to-face. That's okay, fine. But we have actually found number of ways to interact with the people across the world if there is a need for that.
Very good, thank you. Angira, could you take up this dilemma between the need to change and of course the tendency to get back to the old normal in terms of health diplomacy that you talked about? Because I remember, this idea of international health policy. I was in fact in Geneva, and of course Nepal's representative also to the WHO. And I remember the discourse at that time that countries would return exactly to what they are doing today. That, close borders, in fact, stop the flow of essential drugs. This was all there. And yet we went through so many pandemics, and here you are today. So can you please take this up?
Yeah, I also have my reservation. I'm not suggesting that there will be a massive change in any policy, because this is an emergency situation. So we are handling everything at a very emergency way of dealing things. How post-pandemic things will evolve is very difficult at the moment to say. But having said that also, I would really mention here that may not be there would be a grand strategy may not be a grand mechanism to handle this health diplomacy, but each country will now think about health diplomacy in a more substantive way. As I mentioned in my paper also, if India really want to make health diplomacy a soft power projection also, it cannot go back to the old mechanism. It has to make sustain this momentum and also make it more substantive. So, I mean, there may not be a grand policy. Definitely, I'm not suggesting that, but it's difficult to have a grand policies because there are cultural differences, there are bilateral issues, there are geopolitical considerations, which we cannot ignore when we talk of health security and a broader concept. These issues will come up when we overcome this pandemic. Then national interest, individual regional politics, multilateral issues come. Having said that, but we can definitely have priority areas that can be a beginning point where we can cooperate rather than having a grand strategy at the moment to make health issue one of the prime discussion. But we can have individual cases where countries can, as I said in the yellow fever case, which we overcome. So one individual cases can be handled so that there is an example set. Then we can gradually move towards a broader aspect. But definitely, I think pandemic would open one vista that health issue will be an important forum for international security discussions. It cannot be in the sidelines anymore. It is a transnational issue and one has to deal with it. But definitely a grand strategy on health policy is too far-fetched at the moment. It will be incremental for step-by-step development to that towards a more broader concept.
Very good. Thank you so much. Now, is Dr. Netaji around?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, perhaps on the same line, in terms of the question I posed to the other two, you're talking about the India's role in the Indo-Pacific. And of course, the whole idea relates to the notion of power. What makes a country powerful? And of course, how do you exercise that in the most judicious way that it serves your national interest? Now, in that sense, as I told you, I see a very central role for India in the evolving post-COVID-19 world order. But there is a very delicate balance between which way India goes, in the sense that, as you very rightly pointed out, there are pressures as a result of the behavior that you see from China. But at the same time, the larger global geostrategic relationship will pull India on both sides. The US would like India to be very much on its side in its broader geostrategic policy in Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, but also in its confrontation with China. And of course, China would like India not to be in that position. So I think it is going to be very crucial, which way the world moves is, in fact, in a large sense, the way I look at it, depends on which way India moves. And of course, a few of the important European Union members. So give me your perspective on that from what you presented.
Thank you, Ambassador. It is really a pleasure being chaired by you with your very erudite observations from time to time. The point is that at a philosophical level, if you see that this prolonged period of lockdown has unlocked the doors to explore deep into the self and be with the self and in a kind of way go for creative pursuits more. And also, in a way, I wonder, is it time to call for any discussion of post-pandemic world order? We do not know whether this pandemic, till what period it will continue. So it's a bit premature, to my understanding, to call for any kind of discussion post-pandemic order. But if you see that it is clear that the enormity of the crisis is far greater than the crisis the world has faced in last 2 decades. And while the entire world is facing this unprecedented situation, there is yet to emerge what is bothering me, that there is yet to emerge a cohesive, concerted, and unanimous global response to tackle it. So, in place of collective decision making or action, we are witnessing a bitter duel that is going on between countries, especially the US and China, as to who is responsible for the outbreak and spread of the pandemic. Some are calling it communist virus, others are calling it fascist virus. China would like to believe it is a capitalist virus started by US. So unfortunately, we I can to me that we are moving backwards rather than moving forward. So you see that instead of uniting the world, the pandemic has divided the world again into nation states, each jealously guarding its territory, people, and interest, throwing into air the maxims of globalization that entailed establishing a global village. We are looking at resurfacing of a kind of ideological warfare. So there is no end of history. So history is unfolding itself with new conflicts, new duels, new tussles emerging uh, each passing day. So what is there for India? You see that India has been managing this pandemic on its own. And it's a big country, huge country, 1.2 billion people. And while we are managing this pandemic, now there is aggression from China. So you see that there is a notion that India can, in response to the kind of coercive diplomacy, India can go for a constructive diplomacy. And in a way, India can engage with others, looking for answers, looking for new ways. You may take objection to this use of word new, but we may, as you pointed out in the beginning, a brave new world. We may look at a new world. You see that Chinese philosopher Sun Tzu, in his Art of War, a classic, has prescribed strategies as to how to gain territory using deception without resorting to protracted warfare. India has its own Kautilya, who in his Arthashastra has emphasized having silent war that can be won through assistance from strategic partners, boosting arms capability, intelligence sharing, multinational operational capacity. And let me tell you that in this silent kind of diplomacy or war against the pandemic, India looks towards Nepal as a friend and partner. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Netaji. I mean, you spoke exactly like a Neta. But absolutely, I reciprocate. You know, tomorrow if you join my session, I will say that I'll talk a little more on the centrality of India in the emerging global order. But then a test of that centrality will partly depend on how Nepal and India can resolve their widespread, long-standing, this, in a way, this unbreakable friendship, the bonds that brings us together. If these two countries cannot resolve their problems, then it's very, very difficult to be optimistic as to which other countries can resolve their problems. So thank you. Finally, Lobsang Dorje, are you there? Would you like to participate in this discussion a little bit, very briefly, from the perspective of Bhutan, and especially on what you talked about? And I'm talking about this pressure to think anew, to move to a new sort of thinking, or in fact remain stuck with the old. That's the debate today. Lobsang, are you there? Hello? Well, looks like our friend from Bhutan has been disconnected. Oh, no, you are here.
Someone
Okay,
make
please,
Lobsang co-host.
please go ahead.
Lobsang can unmute only when he is co-host. So host, please make Lobsang co-host.
Okay. Thank you, Ambassador, for allowing me to elaborate on my paper, on my study on China, India, and Bhutan ties. Is it audible? Hello, Ola.
Yeah, sir, you are audible.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we are listening. We are
now,
listening.
okay. When we look at China, India, and Bhutan, so it is something to do with a tradition, something to do with a long tradition, long interaction, but not but other side of story. And it is something so confusing, which one can add it as a complex studies. To understand the nature of the state, it is easier to apply some theory and then to understand from academic point of view. But internally, what is going around the region is sometimes we may call it foreign policy, we may call it hard power and soft power influences. And as an independent nation, as a sovereign state, we know Bhutan knows her economic interests, her reliance, her diplomatic trait in the last since since the establishment of Wangchu dynasty in the country. But Bhutan need to move with a cautious threat in order to survive in order to survive between two giants, as Bhutan is sandwiched in between two giants in the north China, in the south in the south India. We know that Bhutan has made a tremendous achievement with the signing of agreement, which is historical milestone from 1910, even from 1772, even from the 16th and the 15th century, Bhutan had good rapport and ties. When Second World War was waging on, when British is in their company, British is in their company, when the India was in the process of freedom struggle moment in India. So Bhutan had some contact, and Bhutan was labeled as a geostrategic point or some buffer zone. But at times it is so confusing that if you look at this hard power and soft power influence of 1960s, the 5-year plan really started. 5-year plan started in 1961. But if you carefully look at the historical timeline, say like the visit of Nehru, the visit of Nehru was very important to India, and then as well as it was important to Bhutan, because annexation of Tibet rules a sense of insecurity, which would mean the political insecurity for Bhutan, and then reassuring the safeguarding of Bhutan by Nehru was some kind of political assurance. And then now economic package still need to be made, and Bhutan pursued a self-imposed isolation till 1960s. With a 5-year plan budget now, Bhutan can open her door to the outside world because it is all about socio-economic developmental activities. So now, in the need of it was urgency. There was proxy war going on between China and India. So if you look at timeline, it is very interesting to look at and revisit the history which was written by the most of the history was written by the foreigner for Bhutan. So now we need to have a subaltern approach. We need to have our own approach to look at the historical timeline and then to view and then to examine what could be the fate for Bhutan. And then coming to 2007, now with the introduction of democratic constitutional monarchy in Bhutan. Now before prior to democratic constitutional monarchy in 2007, it was another historical milestone between India and Bhutan, having renewal the treaty of 1949, having renewal that treaty further it goes to 1910. So it has a chain of event, the chain of event. And then the 2007, now Bhutan have a freedom to choose their own ally and then implement her own foreign policy. But we cannot do it. Now we cannot do it. We cannot do it. But then by foreign policies, and if you look at the threat, and if you look at look of international relation to evaluate, then we can comment. We may not know what is a stack, or what is the internal move played by Bhutan in order to balance. Bhutan is a fulcrum in between two giants. Now, in order to make it balanced, now what are some of the maneuver, or what are some of the moves played by Bhutan is important question to be understood by every scholar, every policy maker in the region. So now Bhutan is surviving, and Bhutan is also, at the same time, Bhutan is also thriving. But then now what is more important is her security, her insecurity on border issues. So Bhutan never comment. Bhutan never had individual say on the border issues, and it is always to do with a negotiation involving India. So now, therefore, now my own understanding, my own study, analyzing the event, synchronization event based on reliability, based on the vitality, based on replicability. Now, what is most important to understand the jigsaw relation between India, China, and Bhutan. Bhutan cannot say that, okay, I want to start diplomatic ties with the China, with the Beijing. Now we need to hope, we need to wait, and the only hope for Bhutan, smaller nation like Bhutan, is to hope for India to now move, and resolve their dispute, the border dispute with China. Then only Bhutan can tackle the issues. And then another way forward is now revisiting of SAC Charter, Article 10, the SAC Charter Article 10. We need to revisit the SAC Charter. And then China is observer member status of SAC, and now in order to check the balance in the region, now India plays the dominant role in the South Asian spectrum. But now the question is now there is constant rivalry, the economic rivalry between India and China, because South Asia has a market for both the countries. Even in ASEAN region, now we can see that India's move to ASEAN region, Lucas policy, ACIS policy. Now, at the same time, China is diverting her interest in the South Asia with her economic package deal. Now, it is up to the state of South Asia, is not the state, it is up to the policy maker to decide and then to implement a new foreign policy which could safeguard our safeguard our thriving culture and tradition, safeguard our nexus of our trade deficit. So in a way, if you look at all those spheres and dimension, now it is only for the leader of my country and the leader of the China and India to decide and look at and to start trilateral, but in non-traditional security. Only
Very
then
good.
we
Very
can
good.
hope
Thank
for
you. Thank
a
you.
better
Thank
future.
you, Logan. That's excellent. I really appreciated your perspective. And that is what I think would make my post-Doklam reflections, and now from Doklam to Galwan pieces very interesting for Bhutan also. But one very important point that you raised, which I also have pursued during both my academic as well as diplomatic roles, is that countries like Bhutan and Nepal can play a very important confidence building roles between our two great neighbors. Because when they are in conflict, we suffer the most. When they cooperate, we also benefit the best. So as a result, we must never exercise this so-called card policies, playing one against the other. And in fact, we should always be instruments of confidence building, that in fact we are here as friends to be sensitive to the interests of both and not to allow our own policies and territories to be at the cost of the other. So that's, I think, is very important. Thank you so much. So I see that the organizer is becoming a bit restless. I know we have passed our time, but I was very taken by this very interesting discussion. So I would like to really thank and congratulate all the four speakers for their excellent presentations. And to conclude it all, from my long exposure to international relations as a student, as a teacher, and as a practitioner, tomorrow I will be talking about the transformation from what I call the hegemonic and conflictual polarity that the world has seen in terms of great power relations historically. And if COVID-19 has taught us any lesson, it has to be a competitive and cooperative pluralism. That in fact, there are multiple great actors, great powers. And of course, when you see the nature of great powers, there is always an element of competition. But that competition does not have to be confrontational and conflictual, but in fact, managed competition with cooperation wherever that is possible. And of course, in plural settings, that in fact, different great powers have different philosophies, different ideologies, different ways of governance, and yet existing together in the global village that Netaji very rightly pointed out, that technology has made us like that, like this Zoom conference is showing. So with that, I'd like to conclude and hand it back to the organizers, and thank you and congratulate all the speakers and thank all the participants. Namaste.
Thank you, sir. Now I will like to render the vote of the thanks. Distinguished chair speakers, ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the end of the session, I deem it a great honor to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of NIICE and WPC to all who have graced us with your presence and contributed their parts to make this event a resounding success. First of all, we all would like to express our profound gratitude and sincere thanks to Ambassador Dr. Shambhu Simkhada for agreeing to chair and moderate the session today. Our sincere thanks also goes to all of our speakers for being a part of the event and delivering such a comprehensive and convincing presentation. We are really honored to have all the speakers with us here today. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to our friends from diplomatic community, experts, academia, media, and different organizations. Finally, I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for our audience who participated in the webinar and those who are watching us on our live on our YouTube channel. Thank you for your valuable time and attention and for making the session productive with your questions. We are truly honored to have you all with us this morning and hope to stay connected with you in future as well. Also, do join us our next session. Thank you so much.